morning to those listening to us from Brazil. Good evening to those listening to us from India. My name is Mariana Buquerque. I am a senior fellow at CEBRI, the Brazilian Center for International Relations, and also a professor at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And today it is my pleasure to host this dialogue on MODI 3.0, Perspectives for India Foreign Policy. Today, for this very interactive dialogue, it is also my pleasure to welcome Professor Kanika Hakra from the Kautilya School of Public Policy in India. Before joining the school as a researcher and a professor, she also held several top-ranking positions at the Indian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including in the G20 Secretariat, when India was the president last year. So she has both an inside perspective from someone who worked closely with government, but also now as an academic. So it's great to hear from you. Welcome, Kanika, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you for having me, and thank you to all the students who've come to attend this lecture. I know we're too many continents away and we're far away, Brazil and India, but it's good that we're having this exchange, and hopefully both can learn from each other after this engagement.
Thank you. And I will kick off our conversation by talking first about the elections result. Because if we are talking about a third term of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, it is because he was re-elected. He had a first term, then a second term. But this third term will come in a different moment for India, right? Both domestically and internationally. And it is a different perspective from what happened in Brazil. Here in Brazil, in the past elections, we had like a major change in terms of political view of the world, ideology, and so on, including in foreign policy orientation. And in India, it seems like we will have a continuity, right? We have the same prime minister, same political party, kept the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Jaishankar, as the minister. So how do you see the election result? Do you think it will impact the margin of maneuver that Modi has inside? And how do you see the main guidelines for Indian foreign policy in this next mandate of the Prime Minister?
Okay, before I begin, I'm sure that the accent may be different. So if any of the students or anyone feels that it's not clear, please feel free to stop me in the middle. So before I begin talking about the Prime Minister's current foreign policy outline, what it was, maybe I can just give you a brief overview of how the elections happened and what the results were and why they were considered so different, both within the opposition and within the ruling party. We have 543 seats that are up for elections every 5 years. And since the 1990s, as a trend, what we are seeing is that we have 2 terms of one government followed by 2 terms of the other government, very similar to how it used to be or is with the US presidency before Donald Trump's time. So this is the sort of trend that was continuing as well. What is different with the third term of the Prime Minister of this ruling party is that it has come, this is the third term, as I pointed out earlier, because it has led to more continuity now in the foreign policy and in the domestic policy of the government. It is different, of course, because they have not come with a full majority. So if there were 543 seats that were required, you needed 272 seats to get more than the majority. When that happens, you're able to form your government. In 2014, the results were 282 for the BJP. And in 2019, they were 303 without the allies. And with the allies support, of course, it was crossing plus. So the aim for the government, for the Bharatiya Janata Party, was to get more than 400. That is what they were aiming for. 400 out of 453 has only been crossed once in the Indian elections, which was in 1984 when our Prime Minister Indira Gandhi passed away, and there was a huge wave of support for the Congress. Now, the Congress is primarily considered as center of left, and the BJP or the Bharatiya Janata Party is considered more right, center right to a large extent. And this is the sort of we have a multi-party system, but these are two big parties that sort of determine how foreign policy is determined, how engagement with the outside world takes place. So they have two broad alliances under each of these two big parties. The BJP has the National Democratic Alliance, which is the NDA, and the Congress has the United Progressive Alliance, which is the UPA. And we've had 10 years of UPA under Dr. Manmohan Singh, and then now we had 10 years of BJP, and followed by another 3.0 version now. This is a sort of overview that I'd like to give about how the elections have taken place. And now coming to your question, Mariana, about what is different and what is similar. So while the Congress, or the Indian National Congress, as it is officially known, was down to 44 seats in 2019, it has doubled its tally to go to 99. This is obviously a big jump because they've come up at a big number, and they are celebrating internally, considering themselves as victors in this election. However, they haven't won the majority. So it's still the BJP that comes to power. And even though it has less number of seats on its own, it currently has 240. But with its allies, it crosses the 272 margin comfortably and is able to form a government. Now, both sides are claiming victory in this situation. The UPA as well as the NDA, saying because they have risen and they have fallen down. But even though they've fallen down, they're still in power, and they determine how the foreign policy and our general domestic policy will also operate. With this to happen, a lot of the discussions after the elections were on what changes the Modi government will bring in place with respect to its outline internally as well as externally. As you pointed out, Dr. Jaishankar has continued, and most of the ministers in the key positions have continued. The defense minister, who is known as the Raksha Mantri here, has also continued. The foreign minister has also continued, as well as the finance minister. They've also continued. So these three key portfolios have continued primarily. It goes to show that the government is keen to show the continuity in its agenda, in how it wants to view the world itself. And that is something that is key to how the government will engage with the world, internally as well as externally.
It was a very good overview, and now I would like to zoom in one specific part of the foreign policy that maybe would be worth discussing here. Because as Dr. Jaishankar was kept as a minister, I assume that most of his policies and narratives will also keep going. And he was very strong, for example, in advocating for India's strategic autonomy, from having a strong Bharat, including using the name Bharat in international statements. And India has a very particular view on geopolitics. You know? Differently from Brazil, here in Brazil, we don't have this idea that we have an immediate threat from our neighbors, from our region. But you in India, you have a very different context. You have border issues that are still to be resolved. You are in the most nuclearized area of the world. So you, of course, have a different perspective on geopolitics. And that is the second topic that I would invite you to develop with us a little bit more. How do you see that this new term of Modi and Dr. Jaishankar as a minister will tackle these current turmoils in geopolitics that we face? Not only Russia, Ukraine, but now we have also a problem in Bangladesh. We have the conflict in Gaza going on. So what do you think would be, what can we expect from India's position in geopolitical conflicts from now on?
A lot of it would be continuity in how it was already operating. So, for example, though you didn't mention it, Pakistan and India have been sort of a topic in international relations that are constantly seeked out by students and by researchers. But this government is not very keen to engage with the Pakistan conversation anymore. It is keen to focus more on the Indo-Pacific, on Southeast Asia as a region, on the BIMSTEC as a regional organization, but not so much on SAARC, which was the South Asian Regional Cooperation Organization that we had. So a lot of that focus seems to be continuing. Actually, some of the articles that have come out in the recent past from analysts have also pointed out that South Asia as a region is important, but there is no engagement that is happening at the regional level within South Asia anymore. It is more an Indo-Pacific strategy, and within that Indo-Pacific strategy, the states that come in, I'm sure if the map is clear for everyone, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka all come in, but not the west side of India. So that sort of engagement continues because Indo-Pacific becomes an important area where a lot of the developments are happening, a lot of threat perceptions are coming from. And of course, the border issue remains a key area of negotiation between India and China. The border issue would be a long-standing issue, I believe, because it's not a new issue that came up in 2020. It's a long-standing issue between the two countries, and since the economic developments on both sides of the border are developing in a very different and fast-paced manner, both states want to get maximum out of the border negotiations at this point of time. If maybe some of the students may remember this, but some months back, there was a lot of furore in India when China released a map where it was showing parts of Indian territory as its own. And then India, in retaliation, released another map showing parts of China that were not originally part of China. So there's this sort of back and forth that keeps happening with the territorial sort of debate. However, engagement with China on economic spaces is still continuing, as it is for most of the world. China is the largest trading partner for a number of countries in Europe, in the Americas, as well as in Southeast Asia. So India is no different from those countries, and it continues its engagement. With respect to Bangladesh, then, of course, I'd like to definitely take some time and speak about it because Bangladesh and India have had such a strong old relationship. The creation of Bangladesh, India was so involved in the process of the state, and always there have been stronger ties, people-to-people ties between the two countries have always been very, very good, politically as well, because we have a state within the Indian largest state, also called West Bengal, where you have strong relations between the ministers on both sides as well. So any turmoil that happens in Bangladesh has a deep impact on how India perceives it and how India engages with the country. And these student protests in general have been sort of a very dark past in Bangladeshi history. So we hope that both the states are able to make most of the situation and come out of it. Sheikh Hasina has said that she wants to participate in the elections when they happen. The interim government has been formed. Both the leaders have spoken with each other. Prime Minister Modi did speak with Muhammad Yunus, who's the head of the interim government currently. So engagement is going to happen irrespective of which power is in place. However, it must be admitted that Sheikh Hasina and the Prime Minister did have a personal equation as well, where they were helping each other out, helping with insurgent issues in the Northeast, whether it was Bangladeshi issues, both were helping each other out in a sort of cooperative manner. But India will work with whichever government comes in place now as well. Please.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
Oh, the other aspect maybe I wanted to speak about was the Ukraine war. I think a lot of Dr. Jaishankar's statements on the Ukraine war have made a lot of noise in public domain, but maybe I'll just reiterate it out for our public here in Brazil. So Dr. Jaishankar made this very famous statement that Ukraine's problems are not the world's problems, which became a sort of global South unifying voice in its own way, where everyone felt that these pressures were being put by Europe on all countries of the global South, and he was able to articulate this idea very clearly in the European mind. So, but it is true that even though Europe's problems are not the world's problems. In our interconnected multiplex world, it is impossible that a problem that happens in another region does not impact the world today. And we have seen the impact of Ukraine war on our own food security issues. I'm sure in Brazil as well, if you could reiterate a little bit of that, how much of that impact was felt in Brazil and what it meant for Brazilian foreign policy and what changes needed to be made because of the Ukraine war. For us personally, even at the defense level, because Russia was so involved in the Ukraine war, a lot of India-Russia military ties or defense ties that go back decades were put under the strain, and India was looking then to diversify how to get its defense equipment from other countries. So that's another interesting sort of fallout from the Ukraine war that happened.
Yeah, we in Brazil also had an impact on food security, especially because we are highly dependent on Russian fertilizers. So when the war started, it was something that caught the attention of the decision makers in Brazil. But you have the fate of geography, right? So you are too close to Russia to avoid talking about
Yes.
it. But we used different narratives, but both India and Brazil were very resistant to keeping Russia out of the conversation. So in that specific point, I think we converged in our international strategy on how to tackle the issue, condemn Russia for the aggression, but not excluding Russia from the negotiations and the conversations and the peace agreements that we hope are to follow. And because I mentioned Brazil, I would like to bring out another topic to our conversation. Brazil and India have a lot of similarities, a lot of differences as well, but we have the legacy of colonialism, we have high rates of inequality, but we also are big regional powers of the global south who see multilateralism and see international relations as a way out of our current middle position in terms of progress to achieving more space in the international system. So how do you see Brazil in India foreign policy? Is there a place for Brazil? What is the place that Brazil has in India foreign policy? How do you think this next term of Prime Minister Narendra Modi could enhance Brazil-India relations? And of course, when we talk about India and Brazil, the BRICS is one of the biggest grouping that we are part together. So if you could also talk about the BRICS and the BRICS Plus, that would be great.
Okay, so actually, maybe I'll start with the later part of the question. When we look at Brazil and India relations, as you know, geography also determines so much of how we engage with our world around us. Since we are not immediate neighbors and we're not even, in the concentric circles, we're far apart from each other. So it never comes across as a security threat. Both countries are never a security threat to each other, which is always a good thing when you're working in multilateral organizations with each other. And I think that is the plus point for Brazil and India. They can both work together in multilateral institutions without the fear of without any insecurity. They both are regional powers in their own right and their own spaces, and they are not coming into each other's spaces in any manner. So it's easier for both these countries to actually work together. If you would look at India-China, that is one of the biggest things that come across because you're so close in the neighborhood. And always when we look at how powers grow in international relations, it's always about the region being first fortified and then going out into the world, larger world. And that is not a problem that India and Brazil face at all. So I believe that is why in BRICS and in the G20, they're able to work together, and even if they don't engage with each other in a lot, by default, because of being global south countries, because of being regional powers, there is a lot of similarity in thought that comes across in how they are putting across their points. And I'm sure, as Mariana, you've researched a lot on Brazil and India, you may have come across a lot of this in your own research as well. So this is one of the key points that I wanted to mention when we look at Brazil and India relations and within the G20 and BRICS. When we look at BRICS, I think that was when it, at least when it began, before it became BRICS Plus, it was these countries that came together and wanted to sort of look at the worldview and try to build an understanding of how to engage with the West, quote unquote. However, as the BRICS is expanding, a lot of the dialogue within Europe that you hear is that it's going to become, is it going to challenge the G20? Is it going to challenge the G7? Because the G7 is a very transatlantic sort of engagement. The G20 is where these two groupings meet, and BRICS and SCO become those regions where, or those organizations where you have separate, maybe the others are meeting and discussing, to put it colloquially. However, the one thing that we need to understand is also that the G7, whenever they interact, there is a lot of convergence of thought before they engage. However, and that is not true in the global south. In the global south, normatively, we think alike, we engage with each other on many issues, but there is no convergence of thought of the kind that you find in G7, which is why BRICS or BRICS Plus as well become important factors in how these states within the global south can come together and engage with each other.
No, that is a good perspective, because BRICS here in Brazil is something that is taken very serious by our foreign policy. So BRICS is a priority and a strategic space for our interaction with the world, and it's something that opens doors for India-Brazil relations. And as you mentioned, I've been studying that for a while now, and the potential of India-Brazil relations is still underachieved. We have a lot of room to grow in that specific domain, and being Global South voices is one of them. And I don't want to end the conversation just now, so I will get this ball of the Global South voice rolling for a while and ask you about the G20, because India last year in the G20 presidency did the Global South Summit, organized many of Global South agendas, important, so the reduction of disasters, hunger. Brazil is keeping the debate on hunger and poverty. And I want to benefit from your experience as you worked in the G20 Secretariat. So if you could tell us a little bit more, how was the experience for India to host G20? And how do you think that the G20 was an illustration of India foreign policy and how India sees multilateral groups and the world? So comment first a little bit on the G20 presidency.
Sure. So I'll first maybe begin by talking about the criticism that India was receiving internally, externally from analysts about the G20, saying that G20 is just a sort of coming out party for India. It doesn't signify anything at the domestic level or at the regional level. And there is no, because nothing is binding in the G20, it becomes almost insignificant as a grouping. These were some of the criticisms that were coming through of the G20. But we need to realize something, that it's also nothing is binding in almost any international organization unless it's a law. And it's very easy to sort of dissuade or put water on top of anyone's ideas, saying that this is just a coming out party. But the sort of engagement that you found within the Indian public in tier 2, tier 3 cities regarding the G20 and the engagement with international powers in these smaller cities, not just limiting it to a Delhi, Bombay, or the metropolitan cities only. This was the domestic benefit that it was very evident with the G20 that was held in India. At the foreign policy level, one of the key things that comes out is every G20 presidency, as you would have seen, you would be observing with Brazil, or next year with South Africa, what we will see is whether what they bring on the table with respect to their ideas, how they frame the conversation. These are important aspects that sort of reflect what the country thinks and wants to engage with the world in the manner that it wants to engage with the world. This itself becomes very important because it gives you an outline to what you want to see your foreign policy as. So, for example, I've mentioned this in some other talks as well, but whenever we look at any global power, it is always about what normative value it is also bringing on the table. For example, you had the American exceptionalism that was talking about self-determination of states. That became the important thing. Or when the French were a big power, it was always about liberty, equality, and justice, the sort of ideals that were taken forward. For India, the concept of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, or the world is one family, becomes that sort of idea that it was wanted to put out to the world, where human beings as it should think as one. And this also aligns with what the Prime Minister said after the Ukraine war had begun, saying that this is not an era of war and we should think beyond these sort of binaries of engagement that were happening. So these are ideas that sort of get propagated within the G20. And the one thing I'd like to add, at least from the lessons that you talked about from the Secretariat working within the G20, was that within the global south, as I mentioned earlier also, there may not be a lot of similarity of thought or convergence of ideas, but it becomes G20 is one of those few platforms where you have 10 developing countries and 10 developed countries. So it's an almost equal footing fighting ground that has been given to the countries of the member states, and that is the one place where you can see Indonesia was fighting was struggling to keep its G20 presidency alive, and India had to also struggle a lot in the beginning to make sure that all participants were coming and engaging with each other. So these are spaces where the global south is actually able to push itself far more and engage with the G7 or the global north largely. I think that's one of the key takeaways for me, because one space where it's an equal footing and how both states engage with each other.
And another thing that for me as an outsider observer that was remarkable about the Indian presidency of the G20 was to come up with a consensual declaration by the end, because it wasn't expected when negotiations began, right? We didn't had consensual declarations from the main ministerials, but then by the end, India diplomacy managed cooperate. And I heard that Brazil assisted on that process, because any window left open by India would be something that could fall on our lip here in Brazil. So it was good that we cooperated on those terms.
That's true. And I'd actually like to point out that it was also during the Indonesian presidency, because I was in the Secretariat when the Indonesian negotiations were also happening. So in general, the global south countries have had a tough time negotiating a document, bringing the global north on board. But Indonesia was successful, India also, and Brazil, touchwood, will also find success.
We hope so. Fingers crossed. The summit will happen in mid-November, and we are very looking forward to have another consensual declaration and hand over it to South Africa with a very comprehensive but effective declaration and combination about the G20, because as you mentioned, it is a very strategic forum for Brazil, for India, and now with the African Union even more. So let's hope that the G20 will still be another platform for Brazil-India relations alongside the BRICS, and also that our bilateral relations became even stronger. And I think this dialogue was a first step to have a debate about India foreign policy here at CEBRI. It is the first debate on India that we do recently open to the public, and I hope that it's only the first. We are already organizing in the Asia program here at CEBRI that is coordinated by Ambassador Marcos Caramuru, another dialogue specifically on India economy. So how can we talk about India being the third economy in the short run, but still having a lot of agricultural-based division of work inside the country, and how can we move beyond that and go further in the India process of development? So that is for the next episodes. Keep on, and everyone who is watching us and who would like to follow more about India foreign policy, please follow CEBRI's social network, because we will keep promoting there the next events and the next activities on India organized by CEBRI. And before I close the event, I will pass the floor to you, Kanika, for any final remarks that you have. And again, thank you for your cooperation and for your participation.
No, I'd just like to say thank you once again, Mariana. Thank you, CEBRI, for inviting me. It was a fun engagement. I hope that the students enjoyed and learned a lot as well. And I hope that we can do more such events and engagement between Brazil and India so that we can build our ties more.
Thank you, and see you everyone who is watching us from Brazil and India in the next CEBRI events.
Okay, bye-bye.